Ding ding bong bong ding ding bong bong ding bong bong.
Hello, Sublation Media viewers, readers, and listeners. It's me again, Douglas Lane, and in this video, I'll be trying to persuade you that since 2016, the reality TV show star and real estate tycoon Donald Trump has done more than disrupt and change the character of the Republican Party, done more than unleash a lumpen mass onto the floor of the Senate. He has replaced the American radical left as the primary source of dissidence and opposition to the U.S. state and its corporate culture. In this video, I'll try to explore what that means for those few of us who still aim to transcend the limits of our increasingly postmodern world. There are too many historical defeats and capitulations for a definitive starting point in this story to be uncontroversially obvious. So let's begin with what is controversially obvious. I'll start not with Occupy Wall Street, but with what Bhaskar Sankara has claimed was a realization of Occupy, and thereby 100 times more significant than Occupy. We'll start with Bernie Sanders' campaign. In Chris Cutrone's upcoming book, The Death of the Millennial Left, this last Marxist explains that Sanders' political revolution was explicitly an electoral strategy for raising turnout, especially among younger, newer voters, and thus returning the Democrats to a congressional majority that they had enjoyed when Obama was elected until the 2010 Tea Party congressional election insurgency. Sanders represented the left wing of the Democratic Party, a wing defined by its relationship to organized labor, along with its rejection of the neoliberal era or the Reagan Revolution. He was, like the Occupy Wall Street movement that preceded him, the Democrats' answer to the Tea Party because, like the Tea Party activists who largely emerged from the remnants of the Ron Paul campaign, he was an answer to statist neoliberalism. It's worth taking a sidestep here and remembering the appeal of Ron Paul. Paul described himself as a constitutionalist and an advocate of little government, which might have put him into lockstep with a Republican Party defined by Reaganism. But it did not. Instead, Paul was a radical. He opposed the neocon agenda of the Reagan era, opposed the nominally Randian Alan Greenspan for his accommodation with the political realities of post-Fordism, and most significantly, for the argument I'm making in this video, opposed the Iraq War, the War on Terror, the Patriot Act, the partnering of big tech and the deep state, and the banking bailouts of 2008. In reality, the Tea Party movement and Occupy Wall Street had much in common. The commonalities would include a rejection of the War on Terror, anger over the economic crisis and bailouts of 2008, some of the same rank-and-file participants in the streets, and a process of self-liquidation into the two major U.S. parties. As Sankara has so often repeated, the Sanders campaign was an attempt to politicize and thereby realize the aims of Occupy Wall Street. Likewise, Trump's campaign was an attempt to politicize and realize the aims of the Tea Party. Both Trump and Sanders aimed to disrupt and change the parties they chose as vehicles for their respective movements. But according to Cutrone, while Sanders successfully challenged Hillary Clinton and reached beyond a mere messenger of protest to become a real contender for the Democratic Party nomination, he accomplished this on the basis of the Democrats' established constituencies. Turnout for the Democratic Party primaries has not been significantly raised, as Sanders hoped. This meant that Sanders did not change the character of the Democratic Party. On the other hand, per Cutrone, Trump did manage to alter the constituency for the Republican Party, bringing in more independent, minority, and working-class voters and integrating more non-voters into the electoral system. Cutrone writes, Trump represented a potential post and not pre-neoliberal form of capitalist politics, regarding changes in policies that have continued from Reagan through Obama, driven by discontents of those alienated from both parties. If the Sanders campaigns and their failures mark the beginning of the left's retreat into irrelevance, let's say that the Biden campaign and administration marks the midpoint of the left's total annihilation and usurpation in this very short and proximate tale. One of the difficulties of the post-Sanders Biden moment is that while Occupy attempted to develop a left-wing Tea Party-style protest against Obama, and thereby provided the conditions needed for an oppositional candidate to emerge from within the Democratic Party, during Trump's reign and into the Biden administration, all left protests were co-opted. For example, while it was the anarchist and radical student left that responded to spontaneous riots in the wake of the murder of George Floyd by organizing their continuation, the effort only rewarded the center of the Democratic Party. In November 2020, Brenton Mock, writing for Bloomberg, reported that every American city that hosted riots went to Biden in the election. Black voters in particular were mobilized by a, quote, heightened awareness of police brutality and a Black Votes Matter effort to get black voters to the polls. The radical language used by the protesters, whether it was defund or abolish, helped to, quote, excite a whole bunch of people to get involved. And the occupation of public buildings and street protests taught people, quote, how powerful our vote is, according to an organizer in Pittsburgh. Of course, the Democrats abandoned the effort to defund or reduce the size of the police presence in America. In February of 2022, the Democrats declared the Defund Movement dead. Instead of defunding, the Democrats got tough on crime, and mayors across the country increased police budgets and created harsher sentencing laws. By 2022, the George Floyd riots were a distant memory, and the tactic of violent confrontation through protests was ceded to the right. After January 6th, the word riot no longer held any emancipatory potential, but only pointed to reaction. Likewise, while anti-war sentiment and opposition to the security state had defined the left since 2002, after the invasion of Ukraine, opposition to the perpetuation of the Ukrainian conflict was only taken up by a fringe of anti-imperialist leftists and grandmothers dressed in pink, as the Ukrainian flag replaced Black Lives Matter signs on the lawns of urban progressives in the blue regions of America. 2 weeks before the Democratic Party's Iowa primary, the COVID virus officially reached America. By the time the center of the Democratic Party consolidated around Joe Biden as their standard bearer, the virus was a central issue on every voter's mind, as fears that going to the polls might mean participating in a super spreader event took hold, and officials and candidates tried to assure the constituents that everything necessary was being done to deep clean the touchscreens and protect the public. As the prospects for something serious developing out of Occupy and the history of the left that it represented dimmed, and after Bernie dropped out of the race, the laptop left was comfortably parked at home, scrolling through Twitter looking for right-wing anti-maskers and COVID skeptics to denounce. It was a good distraction from the malaise, the crippling depression that hovered in the background. When Sanders dropped out, he delivered his movement, his funding mechanism, and his votes to the center of the party he'd been trying to change. It was a defeat that had to be reckoned with, but that seemingly couldn't be reckoned with. To unravel what had gone wrong would mean unspooling a history that certainly traced back to well before Occupy. Locked down, defeated, the left retreated into various familiar roles. We splintered into a million different directions, but each new version of the left was only a repeat. Like a teenager on Tumblr, we became obsessed with our self-definition. Maoism and Stalinism had a resurgence. China became a beacon on the hill, beckoning many of us to commit even harder to Biden's COVID policies and to scorn every demand for personal liberty as reactionary. But if we'd been defeated, at least we'd taken down Trump and the reactionaries behind him with us. At least we could be assured that Richard Spencer and the Proud Boys were suffering too. With January 6th, Trump had finally gone too far. He'd lived and ruled as a 4chan meme, and like every other meme, he'd outlasted his appeal. Trump was gone, we told ourselves. Trump was gone. Only, we were wrong again. The indictment of Trump for campaign finance violations and the falsification of records arrived after revelations that the public had been misled about the origins of COVID, had been misled about the efficacy of vaccines, and that the state had systematically censored debate online in order to control the discourse. The Trump indictment arrived after the Twitter Files hearing, wherein Democrats demonstrated their lack of fidelity to the First Amendment and exposed the party as authoritarian and duplicitous. It arrived after the failure and subsequent bailout of Silicon Valley Bank. It arrived after years of inflation and decline in real wages. It arrived at a moment when the health impact of the lockdowns was impossible to ignore, and what's called excess deaths were surging. It arrived in a moment when dollar hegemony appeared to be a risk. The U.S. was rejecting Chinese efforts to broker a peace deal in Ukraine, and at a moment when 71% of all Americans believed the country was on the wrong track, according to an NBC poll. It is at this moment that Trump faced what 76% of Americans believe is a politically motivated indictment.
The more that a broken system tells you that you're wrong, the more certain you should be that you must keep pushing.
Unless we can organize an independent left, a left unlike what we currently have, a left that can oppose the federal government as it extends itself into every aspect of our life, a left that can oppose the rising authoritarianism, then Trump will be the only opposition there is. In 2016, Hillary Clinton countered Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," with the slogan, "America is already great." If that felt like a pathetic establishment-friendly response, founded on a deep denial in 2016, it's an even hollower retort now. Where is the left? Even the old sectarian newspaper-selling left. It's been liquidated. We should recognize what that means.
Tonight, I'm asking for your vote. And tomorrow, let's make history together. I'm Hillary Clinton, and one last time, I approve this message.